Today we will discuss life in the Middle Ages. The first thing we will talk about in the Middle Ages is the rise of towns and trade. In the Middle Ages, people began to settle in large communities and they began to become larger cities, like Paris in France. These cities began to use their own currency, either coins, usually, or paper money. Before people started trading for currency, they traded for goods or services. Workers began demanding coins for payment and not goods from their employers. Merchants, who were the ones that sold the goods, remember, began allowing people to buy on credit. Credit is a promise of payment later. So if you own a credit card, that is a promise that you will pay later with real money. Increasing currency led to Europe's first banks. People could deposit their money at these banks, and the banks would give out loans to people who needed money, which is another form of credit, because you would have to pay the loan back with interest so the bank could make money off of their loan to you. We saw the rise of guilds, who were trade organizations. They restricted competition in between different trade departments, such as fishermen and blacksmiths. If you were a member of a guild, your entire guild was made up of people who did the same job as you did. So the blacksmith guild was made totally of blacksmiths. To be in a guild, first you started as an apprentice. As a child or a young person, you would work under a master and learn the ropes for many years. After you learned the basics of the job that you were apprenticing for, you became a journeyman, kind of the in-between apprentice and a master, someone who has the basics down but is better than most apprentices, but not as good as a master. We saw different kind of architecture and art come about in the Middle Ages. The most prominent was Gothic architecture. We saw huge cathedrals being built in the Middle Ages, much larger and taller than any building ever seen before, in places like Notre Dame in Paris in France. These larger and taller buildings were made possible by advances in engineering, like the flying buttress. These were new types of support beams that could support large, rounded roofs. Before, roofs were supported by columns, allowing only low, flat roofs. But the flying buttress gave support for much higher roofs, so they could be round and much more innate and prettier. As we see here, the image in the top left, this huge cathedral in Europe, we see the detail and the beauty on the outside. But in the image in the bottom right, we see the flying buttress at work with these large roofs, these tall roofs that give this building a really sense of power and beauty. We also saw tapestries come about, which are large woven wall hangings. They told stories through illustrations similar to paintings. We also saw the rise of stained glass windows, which we still see today in religious buildings. We also saw new types of literature being written. Most of the literature in the Middle Ages were on topics of religion. In the early Middle Ages, only monks and priests could read. But like we talked about with Charlemagne, he educated everyone in his empire, which led to more people being able to read and write. One of the two major works we will talk about today is the Divine Comedy, written by Dante Alighieri. The Divine Comedy is a fictional story of Dante's journey through the Christian afterlife. He goes through the three levels of the Christian afterlife: hell, purgatory, and heaven. The Divine Comedy was written in Italian and helped spread the Italian writing system. In the top right, we see an image that is inspired by the Divine Comedy. In the story, when Dante enters hell, this is one of the first things he sees: a sign saying, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." The second major work we will discuss is the Canterbury Tales, written by Geoffrey Chaucer. The Canterbury Tales was a collection of stories from different types of people from all walks of life on the way to a city in England called Canterbury. The stories and descriptions of characters in the Canterbury Tales help us know how people lived during this time period. The Canterbury Tales were written in English and helped spread the English writing system. In the Middle Ages, we saw advancements in thinking and learning. Alchemy was an early form of chemistry. The biggest attempt in innovation of alchemy was people trying to turn lead to gold. Now they were unsuccessful, but they did learn how different materials reacted with each other, which allowed scientists to further their research with chemistry in the future. Universities started to spring up in the Middle Ages. People at universities read on topics such as science, math, philosophy, astronomy, and medical texts. The rise of universities helped create a new educated class who spoke and wrote in Latin. The last thing we're going to talk about in this presentation is the rise of a new way of thinking that Thomas Aquinas developed. He tried to use logic to prove Christian teachings. At this time, people only accepted religion as the way to interpret the world around them. But Thomas Aquinas tried to use logic along with religious teachings to explain natural phenomena around them. And he called it scholasticism.